Here we are. We are the Data Protection Breakfast Club with our friend Trevor Hughes, the CEO of IAPP. Your dog, Keanu.
He's going nuts, man. He's having
Keanu
like
just
the
did
craziest day.
During the conversation with Trevor, people should look out for a time when you go close the door, and then your dog comes right back in.
He's so annoying. Like, why is he like? Look at this. Why is he like this today? You know what it is? Okay, buddy. Okay. He had surgery in his mouth last week. He had a cyst and he had some stitches, and like he's just not getting enough playtime. And this is the result of a Hungarian Vizsla not giving playtime. So yeah, I'll try to manage him as best as I can. But if I put him in the crate, he'll just bark the whole time. So that's not going to be the way.
We'll go quick, and you can take him out.
Yeah. But hey, man, we got a pretty good guest today.
We have a good guest today. We had a great conversation. Can't wait to share it with everybody. Trevor is the CEO of IAPP, which is the leading body in privacy. 65,000 members. Does certifications. You and I both have CIPP US and EU. They have technical ones. They have management certifications. A great place to get started. The first person I ever knew that had one was my boss, the chief privacy officer at TD Ameritrade, and I saw it on his wall. I was like, "What is that? What's the IAPP?" And
on the wall, huh? Okay.
And he got it framed in his office.
Nice. Nice.
This was like 2011.
Yeah, well, around that time, I don't know exactly how long I've had mine, but it's been a while now. Man, I gotta be honest, I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know what it was when I started researching this. I was at the firm and my boss, had kind of given me the green light to like go explore privacy as a practice area for the firm. And I was in a corporate group, and we got to get Dennis on here. He's such an interesting person. He's not a privacy guy, but I'm not a privacy person without Dennis Ali, who absolutely was had a vision for me. And hopefully I've lived up to kind of his expectations, but he was like, go figure out how to do this. We've got clients who need help. Right. And I was like, okay. And so I went and I started doing research, came across the IAPP, obviously much smaller back then, and then saw these certifications. I think back then the only ones they had was CIPP US and EU. I think that was it.
They didn't. I don't think did they have EU? I'm not even sure they had.
I don't even think they had EU. I think you're right. I'm not sure. Either they just had gotten it or still wasn't out. And I was like, holy shit, well, I better get to work on this. And I remember I bought the 2 little books and they mailed them to me. I'd never been to a conference. I'm in Miami, man. So it's about as far from the privacy mecca as can be. And I get these books and I'm just studying at night and FIPS and all these kind of classic, fair information privacy principles and these kind of things. And then I went and took this test, Andy, and it was at a test center, in this awful neighborhood in Miami, right? With a proctor and this old shitty computer. And I honestly don't remember what my score was, but I remember feeling tremendous relief because it was the first. I mean, obviously me and you are lawyers, and we've got the lawyer credential, but it was my first professional kind of credential. I was like, okay, now I got some letters. It's my letters.
It's the certification is really just the doorway into this,
right?
And we talk a lot about this with Trevor. It's the doorway into this incredible community, and for him. An incredible story of growing from 300 members up to what it is now, which is 65,000, which is a crazy number. And, super interesting story. And he mentioned also that he thought about being a history teacher at one point. Interesting grasp of history, though. He has the grasp of history on privacy as well as the world, and he's melded those two into his career and current events. It's super interesting.
And what's interesting about Trevor too is he has a good lens for history and a good appreciation for it. But he's also here since the beginning. Not only does he appreciate it, he makes it, right? I know we talk about Harriet Pearson with him a little bit, and Alan Weston and some of these founding leaders of our profession. He's definitely one of in that very elite small group of doing Jules Polonetsky, these types of folks, in that very small group of doing it when this wasn't a thing to do. like, and that takes some courage. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about like more of the details as to like how he got to 65,000 from, $50 and like a newsletter,
Well, so without delay, here it is.
Let's do it.
All right, here we are, Data Protection Breakfast Club with Trevor Hughes, the CEO of IAPP, someone we've known for a little while now, and we're really excited to have you here. Thanks for being with us.
It's great to be here. Good morning to you both.
Good morning to you. You selected this song. This is I Wear My Sunglasses at Night. I've got Corey Hart behind me. If you all haven't seen this video in a while, you should watch it. It is amazing. Did you all watch it recently?
I watched it like
I haven't watched it recently.
Yeah, it's a good video, man. It's a good video.
It's very dystopian. In a very strange way.
It's relevant. Listen. I just want to start with an explanation, and that is, first of all, I was no massive fan. Back in the 80s, I actually would have had significant disdain for Corey Hart. But given the context of everything, as a Canadian, as someone, and you guys tasked me with picking, a song emblematic of the era, I thought Corey Hart, I Wear My Sunglasses at Night was as embarrassing a pop culture phenomenon as I could. And so we, I'm not sure if many Canadians will own up to the fact that Corey Hart is in fact one of ours, but indeed he is. So yeah, and it look, Sunglasses at Night, it seemed to have some relevance.
It's a funny reflection against sort of something that you've talked about a lot, which is the comparison between privacy and art. And it's not exactly the art we're thinking about.
Yeah, right.
but it's true.
That's right.
That's true.
Right.
So Pedro, Pedro usually have an opening query for the guest. Do you have one, or today?
I do. First of all, I think we should, just speaking about sunglasses, like I think it'd be very Kanye West of us to wear sunglasses for the rest of the season, just because. So we might need to consider that on the episodes. But I do, and Trevor, first of all, like Andy said, like super thanks for being with us. This is cool for us on our podcast. Well, the last week's been exciting, and so I'm going to go right to the heart of the matter. I'm not going to ask you a political question, but tying it somehow to privacy. One of the things I've seen over the last week is, obviously all of the large platforms, including the one I work for, making changes to try to curtail some of the misinformation and like insightful speech that's kind of adding fuel to the fire, if you will, out there in the country, in the U.S. specifically. As a result of the changes that some of the platforms have made, a lot of the speech seems to be going to like more secure venues. Like I don't think the conversations that are creating some of the fervor are disappearing. I think they're just going into the darkness. From a privacy perspective, Trevor, like I'm trying to ask this question as like gently as possible, but like, what are your thoughts on whether or not we need to think about encryption again in light of what's happened in the last week or so? And like, just generally, feel free to chime in on any part of anything I just said, but like that specific question is the one I'm the most interested in. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so, first of all, what a shocking and saddening week. And there are so many things. And I think I, like many, have found myself just incredibly distracted over the past week. And it's been hard to focus. But like so many things in the world today, whenever something major happens, it almost immediately is apparent that there is a privacy intersection, that there's a connection to our world. And so let me just go down a quick list. And I think there's a few. First of all, last Wednesday, 2 senators from Georgia got elected, and they're both Democrats, which gives the Dems control of the Senate. That changes the nature of our discussion about national privacy legislation. So that's a big deal. That's a big privacy issue, and that's a big deal. in the wake of the insurrection, of the violence in Washington, D.C. last week, I think we have seen lots of privacy issues emerge. Absolutely, one of them is the content moderation and trust and safety on the major platforms, and the deplatforming of certainly President Trump, but others as well. There are indications that Twitter shut down the accounts of some tens of thousands of people or accounts that had been putting forward conspiracy theories and other content that Twitter has now deemed problematic. I think that raises all sorts of issues. First of all, the connection of content moderation to trust, content moderation to our engagement with these platforms and our sense of security and safety while we are on those platforms. That absolutely has an overlay with privacy. It also, I think, speaks to what inevitably will continue, which is the tech lash. We will continue to see a politicization of tech. And I think the major platforms are going to continue to find that it is some bumpy road ahead that they're going to have to be going through. And then in terms of technology and our human need to communicate, let's take it back to its most fundamental level. It is a fact that in order for us to create trusting relationships, in order for us to feel safe and secure in society, we have to have privacy wrapped around our communications with each other. When I'm talking to my wife in a private way, I need to know that that conversation is private. Otherwise, it's really difficult for us to create an intimate relationship. When I'm talking to employees, when I'm talking to coworkers or colleagues outside in the world, whoever I'm talking to, our communications need a sense of privacy wrapped around them. Now, there are varying contexts and varying degrees of privacy that we need for those communications. Some of them are so sensitive as to require some level of, sure, encryption or security. Not for nothing, but it was not soon after the advent of the written word that we found things like ciphers and seals and trusted messengers emerge. And that's because human beings need the ability to communicate in ways that generate trust. We have people that we need to create relationships with, and those need to generate trust. So whether we end up with end-to-end encryption. It's notable that WhatsApp is in the news right now, and their end-to-end encryption is part of that story. Whether we end up with end-to-end encryption on all sorts of platforms, and some of these darker conversations go to even darker places and exist there. Whether we see countries around the world start asking for backdoors into encrypted solutions. All of these things are really hard to know. I would expect kind of all of them to happen. I'm sure there will be a migration to darker places, and I'm sure there will be jurisdictions, maybe even the United States, where some law enforcement officials start saying things like, "Look, we need access to this stuff," almost the way the FBI did when we had the San Bernardino terrorist attack, and Apple wouldn't unlock a phone. Complicated times, and just like so many of our stories these days, privacy is woven into all of it.
No, that's interesting, and thank you for that kind of like nice round robin of all the issues you've spotted. For me personally, one of the things that I am super wary about, and you hear this in the podcast and in a lot of my kind of like public speaking, is government overreach and government taking advantage of situations to give itself like sweeping investigative power. You alluded to it a little bit there with respect to the Apple iPhone unlocking scenario in the San Bernardino incident. I worry that that law enforcement specifically will use this as a "told you so" and ask for either proposed either legislation will be proposed to give law enforcement, to require tech companies to give law enforcement greater access to otherwise private communications, or for law enforcement to invest more in like ways to disrupt or take down those communications, right? I mean, it's a tricky space. Like you mentioned WhatsApp, and one of the things that I was looking at yesterday is the top 2 downloadable apps in the iOS store right now today is number 1 is Signal, and number 2 is Telegram, right? So
Yep.
Signal is a like non-for-profit, donations only organization. It's well funded, but it's not funded like per se WhatsApp.
Right.
And then Telegram, I think, is owned by some UAE somewhere in the UAE is my understanding. So like not a lot of visibility into how Telegram is designed or operates. And so while I think there's been like this reflex to go, let's go to the most securest place possible, I'm not convinced that these 2 organizations specifically have the resources to be as secure as we think they are, because of the fact that they're not as well funded or well resourced, well staffed, or mature. Any thoughts on any of that? And it's just
look, so it raises all sorts of issues, and let me start with a caveat, and that is that I do not work very deeply in the national security and access to data by national security organization space. So I certainly wouldn't hold myself out to be an expert. But let's just note that this moment, like so many before, is also fraught with all sorts of tensions. I think it's notable that after 9/11, after prior terrorist attacks, after prior national security incidents, there has been sort of a move towards greater data collection, greater powers for law enforcement. And then there is inevitably a rationalization or a pullback from that. And Edward Snowden certainly was part of that. We've certainly seen that ebb and flow for some time now. I think that debate will continue, and that ebb and flow will absolutely continue. What I find striking in the moment that we are in right now is that it was not for lack of intelligence or data that this happened. If anything, it was in plain sight. And if there's any concern, it's that with deplatforming much of this debate, moving it into darker corners, that it's less visible and less apparent. So I think there is an irony with the attack that occurred last Wednesday, and actually in some state capitals. So I think we can use the plural, attacks that occurred. There was very visible intelligence there. And
there, Trevor, like on Twitter in particular, I've seen and rejoiced in a lot of the people that engaged in the attack, the Capitol, caught via Twitter.
Be exposed,
Actually, people being like, identify this person, and then the Twitter people identify that person over time. And so I sort of question whether President Trump aside, I sort of question the deplatforming and whether what's the ultimate value there. And of course there's speech issues associated with that too, but I'm wary to see it completely go a certain direction too.
What's interesting to me about that comment, Andy, is like in previous life I did a different job, and one of the biggest challenges with ISIS and Al Qaeda is just that they move in shadows. They're difficult to identify.
Yeah, sure.
They've got protocols in place as an organization to do like important things to subvert and avoid law enforcement. The main one is they don't use a lot of digital communication channels, and when they do, they use only the most secure ones, right? They operate outside of the like kind of normal and expected channels. Like the only time they are on, like, or they historically were on like broad social media was for, kind of sweeping propaganda, nobody's identified type of nonsense, like recruitment nonsense, but like official business, if you will, like only took place in the shadows. I feel like this movement is probably going to learn from the mistakes that just happened. And if it is a movement, not going to take selfies while they plan their next or conduct their next, criminal act. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
totally agree.
Let's lighten the mood just a bit, because I do want to talk a little bit about Trevor, like what you've done over the years, because it's super interesting to us. And then in particular, we both came up in ad/marketing, And you have some of that in your background too. And we're always talking about how critical advertising and marketing is in the kind of like development of privacy as a thing over the years. And we're looking for you to validate that because you did some of that work too. But we also just want to. It's an interesting story to hear about how you came into what you're doing, and how the IAPP helps so many of us every day in so many different ways, and the growth of that.
Sure. So a little bit of sort of my professional background and leading up to the IAPP. So yeah, I'm a lawyer. When I graduated law school, I started work at an insurance company. When I moved into that insurance company, I got the file on my desk. My internal client was the marketing and advertising team. And that meant that in 1995, I was the legal support for the first website that this insurance company was putting up. So even though I was brand new as a lawyer, I got a mile deep in internet law, online law, electronic signatures, contracting online, and online privacy. And so I was pretty useless in everything else that lawyers should be doing, and I got pretty good in what was a pretty shallow pool right then. There was just not a lot of law or structure around it.
Trevor, it's a classic story. Give the new guy the website.
Classic
story.
Look, I'll tell you, I was an intern at that insurance company before I got hired. I got hired after graduating. And when I was an intern, I actually brought my own PC to my cubicle. There was no PC in the cubicle so that I could use an early version of Microsoft Word on my desk. This is 1994. And I remember one of the lawyers saying to me, yeah, no, you can't be drafting your own legal memos on your word processor. We actually have secretaries that do that work. And so yeah, it was a different world. But anyways, that led to, in 1999, me being recruited to work for .com, a company called Engage. It was one of the early ad serving platforms. It had both ad serving, behavioral targeting, and ad networks within its family of companies. It was part of the CMGI family of companies. And there I was corporate counsel, privacy counsel for the organization. And I certainly wasn't the first kind of privacy leader in an organization. Harriet Pearson had been hired at IBM by that point. A few other organizations had put in place CPOs, but I was probably in the first 40 or 50 in the country. There were very few of us back then. And I worked at Engage for a couple of years, and then the .com bubble popped. And while I had been at Engage, we had partnered with DoubleClick and MatchLogic and Avenue A and a number of the early ad serving companies. And we had created a trade association to help not only stabilize the industry, but create a common face to engage with state attorneys general and the Federal Trade Commission, all of which were very intrigued by online advertising at that moment in time. You may remember, or the history was, that DoubleClick announced an acquisition where they were going to be merging offline data with online data. And somehow this was the Rubicon, right? Like if you crossed that line, that privacy would forever be gone and damaged. It almost seems quaint nowadays, but so DoubleClick had made that announcement. It sort of created massive amounts of media attention and regulatory attention. And so the NAI, the Network Advertising Initiative, was created. When the .com bubble popped, I had the opportunity to roll out of Engage and become the executive director of the NAI. So I did that. And so I ran the trade association for a number of years that led the online advertising space, or did the public policy work for the online advertising space. The NAI still exists, of course. It's very active and very strong, and does great work still. That was 2002. Right around that time, it also turned out that canned spam was incredibly hot and had not yet been passed. California introduced a law that was essentially going to shut down email marketing in the country. It was a very hard consent standard to meet. Also, email marketers were struggling with false positives at all of the ISPs, so they were getting blocked pretty actively, and there was no voice for the email marketing industry. And one of the CEOs at the NAI was also in the email marketing business, and so asked for the NAI to pick up that space. So we created the ESPC, the Email Sender and Provider Coalition, and that became the Email Marketing Trade Association. So I ran that as well. And then the IEPP was looking for an executive director part-time. And so I picked that up, and I ran all three for 7 years or so until 2009, 2010. And then the IEPP was just getting so big, so was the NAI and the ESPC, that I had to pick one, and chose the IEPP. And so from 300 members when I first came in to 65,000 globally now, the organization's grown quite a bit.
What year was that when you joined?
I joined the I'm in my 19th year. I just had my 18th anniversary with the IEPP.
Congratulations.
So it was 2002 that I started with the IEPP.
Andy, what were you up to in 2002, Andy?
In 2002, I was teaching tennis on Martha's Vineyard.
I was a semi-college dropout about to join.
Jobs, and then
I was. Now you're making me feel old, guys.
I was taking a break. I'm pretty sure that was my break. It might have been 2001, but I was either taking a college break or just getting back. Like, it's just sad.
Yeah, well, I was trying to decide if I should go to law school, and I guess being at the beach and playing tennis was helping me figure that out. Worked out. What Trevor, when you were at the NAI, did you all write the code, or did that come later?
Yeah, no, we had an early version of the NAI code. So, and to be really clear, before I came on as executive director, people like Christine Varney and others helped to develop the first version of the NAI principles. And then we certainly worked on them after that point, did some work on sensitive data and health data in the NAI. We also worked on the Web Beacon standard. So that was one of the things we did. We also actually did some work in Europe, and it was my first exposure to advocacy and policy work in the European Union in Brussels on one of the early versions of the telecom directive, which was going to create an affirmative consent standard for every cookie on a web page. And so I spent a couple of weeks in Brussels going office to office, talking to members of European Parliament and actually showing them what their local newspaper would look like from their hometown if there was this cookie standard put in place.
It seems like, and we had Jules on and we talked about this too. It seems like in this space in particular with cookies and ad tech, it's the more things change, the more they stay the same. We keep having all of these same issues come up, and we like juke and jive, like dodge, and like do you think we're just sort of in a holding pattern until there's an online privacy law and we kind of have we have CCPA kind of pushing things, but like do you feel like we're kind of at that moment now or soon?
Well, first of all, let's call out Jules Polonetsky, because I probably should have mentioned his name. He and I were hired the same month. I was at Engage, which was the #2 ad network at the time. He was at DoubleClick, which was the #1 ad network at the time. And Jules Polonetsky and I have been very close friends for 20 years now. And he is a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal leader in our space. So anything that I say that's inconsistent with Jules, it's just because I'm not as smart as him. But Jules is really an amazing leader. Then on to the Groundhog Day reality of some of the online privacy debates. And I think specifically when I said Groundhog Day, the issue of cookies and online advertising, that's the space where I feel like it's the most Groundhog Day-ish of any of the spaces that we're in. 20 years ago, Jules and I we're talking to regulators and policymakers around the world about appropriate cookie standards. In Europe today, in the United States today, we are talking, not we, the IAPP doesn't do advocacy, but our members, the community is talking to regulators about appropriate cookie standards. And guess what? We still don't know. Like, if you try to parse what the common position is in Europe right now with regards to cookie standards, it's really hard because differing data protection authorities have slightly different approaches, it would seem, even though, as an example, the CNIL in France just recently brought down some pretty significant fines against Google and Amazon for cookie non-compliance. There is a Groundhog Day aspect to that. And I think what it speaks to is as much a rock and a hard place problem, which is that the regulatory standard that is out there, if you read it in a plain reading, whether it's GDPR, the e-privacy directive, whatever it might be, even some of the data protection authority interpretations, there's a pretty clear interpretation that you can come away with that, from that with. But when you try to apply that in the real world, either from a systematic perspective, an operational perspective, or from a user experience perspective, it does not work. That dog don't hunt. And so we have been stuck in this rock and hard place problem where the regulators, the advocates, the policymakers even adopt standards that when you try to interpret them into the reality of operating an online business, it simply does not function. And we have not yet been able to reconcile that. We have not yet been able to reconcile that, and those debates are still raging. And Andy, to your question, I don't think it's a lack of law. Because we've got the GDPR in Europe, we've got the e-privacy directive and may soon have an e-privacy reg. We've got lots of regulators giving us opinions. I don't think it's a lack of law. I think it's this rock and hard place problem. And frankly, my expectation would be that we will continue to see differing levels of compliance, differing approaches, a really complicated and risk-filled environment until either on the one side, business comes to some kind of conclusion as to what the best practice is and adopts it consistently, or alternatively, the regulators get so serious that they shut the whole damn thing down. And of course, that's a pretty terrible outcome as well. So yeah, it's a challenging space. I think we're going to see the same kind of issues in global data transfers in the wake of the Schrems II decision last year, that there just are not good answers. And until we get better interpretations, I think we're in a tough place.
I just changed gears here on something that I think is equally important to like the regulatory and legal developments and how we're adapting to that, is kind of like two emerging issues that I see really coming to the forefront at the same time. And one is like privacy as a luxury, right? Whereas you can pay to opt out of, behavioral data collection or having your data monetized. And two, like the bias and discrimination issues in artificial intelligence and machine learning, automated decision-making systems, and how privacy intersects with that issue, and how traditionally marginalized groups and underrepresented groups may be underrepresented in the model data that's being used to train these models, and therefore the implicit bias or the bias being built into the systems. I raised those 2 points to make to ask my actual question, which is one of the other things I observed being a person of color in our practice area, in our profession, is the still tremendous need to increase diversity within our ranks, and how important that is to solving the two problems, or to addressing the two problems that I just kind of referenced. Trevor, kind of from where you sit, which is really, you said 65,000 members, and being able to see this global view of like our community, are we doing a good job on increasing diversity? Any ideas on what we can do better and how to empower women and people of color and people from underrepresented groups in our profession, and just kind of your general thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, so boy, there's a lot there. First of all, let's talk about privacy as a luxury and privacy as privilege. privacy is a fundamental human truth. We all need privacy. And that is irrespective of class, race, ethnicity. Privacy exists as a societal norm in every society in the world. And so it would be a tragedy if it was the exclusive domain of those with means to achieve some form of digital privacy. Julia Angwin and others have done some pretty phenomenal work on this and have shown that it's actually really hard to achieve digital privacy, and that it can be expensive, and it does require higher levels of education, wealth, and other things. And so, yes, we have a problem right there. And I think you're absolutely right, Pedro, to highlight the fact that it has some class overlays, some racial overlays that are deeply problematic that we need to keep working on. Privacy cannot be the exclusive privilege of the privileged. So that's the first thing. Second thing, with regards to AI and other things, you know, we've touched on some things that are parallel to privacy already. We talked about content moderation. Now you've raised AI, and privacy kind of sits between them. All of them speak to a sense of trust and safety in the digital economy. And I think they are all very much related and critical. And what we are seeing emerge is a sense of professionalism, a sense of intellectual focus, academic focus, inquiry into how do we preserve trust? Because as we engage with the digital economy, if we don't trust it, it will never achieve its full realization, its full potential in societies around the world. I often look back historically to the Industrial Revolution. When the Industrial Revolution emerged, there were so many societal consequences that came about because of the Industrial Revolution. In many ways, public education, the sense of a childhood, the idea of a weekend, labor standards, industrial safety standards, environmental standards, women's suffrage, women's rights, all of these things emerged from the Industrial Revolution as we started to tackle the consequences of industrializing society. We are in the first 25 years of the digital revolution, and privacy, content moderation and safety, ideas of digital ethics, data ethics, ethics in AI, those are the societal issues that have emerged first and foremost as we've tackled this new revolution, this digital revolution. And I don't think it will be work that is completed in my lifetime. It will be the work of generations, just like we are still dealing with labor issues, environmental issues, women's rights issues, pay equity issues in the workplace, racial equity issues as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And that's 250 years later. We will still be dealing with these issues and managing and working in them. What it does mean is for privacy professionals, content moderation professionals, AI and data ethics professionals, there's a lot of work ahead and a lot of job security. Now let me speak to the issue of diversity in the field of privacy and more broadly in the digital economy. It's a place that we need to do more work. I am very proud of the fact that within the IEPP, our membership is almost exactly 50-50 male and female. And that as we have researched our field, it really does seem that there is parity from a gender perspective within our field. On the other hand, when you go to our conferences, they are predominantly white. And it's a problem that Black, Indigenous, people of color are not as represented as perhaps the population otherwise should suggest. One of the interesting things about this challenge is that there's actually a privacy and data issue that we have to overcome, and that is, I can't tell you today what percentage of our membership is Black, is Latino, Latina, is people of color, because in many jurisdictions I can't get that data. That there are barriers for me to get that data. With that said, at the IEPP, we're certainly looking at this. We're working on this. Our board created a diversity committee last year and came up with a number of recommendations. We'll be rolling them out earlier this year to not only ensure that within our professional group, within our professional structure, we have solid representation from Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but also that the pathways into our profession are wide and well lit for diversity and inclusion, so that we are a clear destination. And I think that's going to be, again, the work that goes on for a long time after I'm gone. But we're embracing it, and we certainly need to do more.
If strides can be made there, it'd be pretty interesting, because the IAPP already has so much global diversity that would be very amazing if those strides are made too. It'd be a really interesting set of people, and when we can all return to a room together, even more amazing to meet with and get to know people. We miss that.
Here.
We miss that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the IAPP, by the way, which for me, 12 years ago when I first joined, was my avenue to figure out how to do this. And I'm extremely grateful to the IAPP. And you mentioned Harriet Pearson earlier, Harriet Pearson specifically too, who took a meeting with me 10 years ago or whatever at some noisy bar in DC. And I didn't realize who she was. I knew she was an important figure, but I didn't realize she was like the first and the foremost. And her kind of mentoring me, if you will, and then the IAPP and me being able to use the resources available even back then to figure out how to do all this is why I work at Facebook. I'm confident about this, like
Fantastic.
and like me being involved in the IAPP over the years, which I have been on advisory boards and panels and whatever. I met Andy through the IAPP. Like, these are the things that the IAPP has done for my career as a first generation lawyer coming from South Florida that doesn't have a super robust privacy community. There's no way I could have kind of had the career that I've had, but for the resources provided to me by the organization. So I'm very grateful in that way, Trevor. And I think it's a great vehicle for people who are coming from backgrounds where, you don't have people to your left and your right that kind of understand what you're trying to do. You can meet those people here. So, or at IAPP,
Trevor,
and I don't mean just at the conference.
Trevor, did you envision that when you joined up almost 20 years ago? You must have had a vision in your mind for, like, you made a choice. I didn't know about this.
Yeah.
You said it.
Yeah.
You
Look,
made a choice.
So I'll tell you the flat truth on that. Back in 2002, I took the IAPP job. And like I said, I think we had 300 members, maybe 380 members, something like that. And I think we had just over $30,000 in the bank. Wow. And I remember telling my wife, look, I'll take this job for a little while. I'll network like hell and I'll get a job as a CPO maybe. I was seriously looking at the possibility of taking a job as a high school history teacher because it had benefits, and I had 2 young kids and we needed benefits. But I went to my first, actually I'd been at the first 2 IAPP summits that had occurred. I'd spoken as executive director of the NAI there, but the first summit that I ran, I went to it and I stood up at the very beginning to introduce the conference, to welcome everyone. And I think we had 200 people in attendance. That's how big the show was back then. And I said, guys, we are a profession. Look around. You are part of a profession. This is an emerging profession, and we need to recognize ourselves in that way. And so I think from a very early start, I had this idea, this vision that we could kind of puff up our chests and stand straight and say, look, we're a profession. This is a new digital economy profession. And yeah, it's tiny now, but the only direction that this can go is upwards. And so certainly, I'm always astonished by the growth of the IAPP, by the growth of our membership around the world. But I think there always has been a sense that that this is a profession. And Pedro, I just have to tell you how much I love the story of Harriet Pearson taking a meeting with you. First of all, man, did you score big with that meeting, because Harriet is absolutely the real deal.
Oh, yeah.
But I love those types of stories within our profession, because they're everywhere within our profession, where somebody had a meeting, somebody said you should talk to, somebody did something that got someone onto a path. And there are just thousands of those stories within the profession. And it's one of the things that makes me really proud. I do believe that the profession of privacy, our community, actually has a quality to it that is somewhat unique. And I think the IAPP has been a part of that. We have sort of created the culture of our profession. And it's one of the things that I'm really proud of. We are way more collaborative than other professions. We are way more cordial and familial than other professions. And that's a really cool thing.
I think one of the biggest reasons why that is, Trevor, is kind of the IAPP's consistent non-advocacy approach on issues, right? Like it's very, that makes it a more open forum for people on different sides of the issues, right? Which within the same profession. So I think it's a great characteristic, and I'm glad you guys have cultivated that, because you can kind of trust what you're reading, because it's not coming, or reading or participating in or whatever, because it's not coming from some sort of policy position. Right. Neither here nor there. With that said, though, there have been some policy positions which I think were appropriate and usually on really big picture issues. So I think you guys have found the perfect balance, and you should keep it up. It's good.
Yeah,
especially compared to other professions.
Well, that was a strategic call early on, to be sure. That we decided we're not a trade association and we're not going to take policy positions. We don't want to try and pick a winner on some of these debates. The way we describe it is that we like to be the big tent, and we don't pick sides in the fight, but we certainly like to bring all the participants into a space where they can have an honest dialogue about that. And as a result, academics, advocates, industry, regulators, they have all found within the IAPP a comfortable place to engage. I'm certainly very proud of the fact that we have regulatory bodies around the world, data protection authorities, enforcement agencies in the US and Canada and elsewhere, that join organizationally the IAPP. So that, as much as Facebook is a member of the IAPP, so too are many of the enforcement bodies around the world. And that's a pretty remarkable thing.
I think it creates a safe space for people to not know the answer to stuff, because what we deal with is so confusing and complex sometimes, and we deal with changing technology all the time, that it creates, as you said, Trevor, a big tent where we can have honest conversations about how hard this stuff is, and how complex it is. And I remember being at a summit like maybe 3 or 4 years ago around GDPR launch type time, and a couple regulators on stage, maybe someone from France or something. And there was a question sort of posed out there about, like, when you get sort of a forget request, should you retain any data that showed that you effectuated that request? And I remember the person, from the DPA basically saying, well, I think you need to do your best to be practical.
Yeah, right.
But it was very clear that they felt safe enough to kind of answer that question, like, you have to do what you think is the right thing with respect to your organization. And that's uncommon. I think that's pretty uncommon.
Yeah.
Let me give one more shout out, because since my Harriet story is, I love it, and we got to get Harriet on here, Andy, like ASAP. But over at the beginning of the pandemic, so this would have been like March, I spoke on some virtual panel. I don't even remember. And a young, recent law grad named Nicole Sakin was listening in the audience, and I see you smiling, so this is good news. And she was listening, and she reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm interested in this profession. Really cool stuff on the panel. I can't find a job, and the leads I had all disappeared because of the pandemic." And so we jumped on the phone. We had a great combo, and one of the things I told her was to reach out to the IAPP for help networking, figuring out who's hiring, what kind of things, and to look outside of like traditional go to a law firm or go be a law clerk or whatever type roles. She did that, and guess where she works? She works at the IAPP. Okay, and she's excellent. Okay, and so like, shout out to you guys for recognizing talent. I think she is going to be an excellent leader in our field over the years, and I'm glad that she's cutting her teeth with you guys. So Trevor, I guess shout out to you guys for hiring her, and also like this is my public request for you guys to like propel her, because I think she's going to do
well. So let me tell you. So Nicole came in and is part of something pretty special at the IAPP, actually. A number of years ago now, 8 years ago, I guess it was, Dr. Alan Weston passed away. Alan Weston, of course, is one of the intellectual forefathers of the field of information privacy. In 1967, he wrote the book Privacy and Freedom, which really set the groundwork for much of our thinking about information privacy as it exists today. And Alan Weston was an early founder of and engaged with the IAPP, and certainly was a friend and mentor to me. When Alan passed away, we had worked with him prior to his death from cancer. He donated his entire professional library to us. So just not too far from where I'm sitting right now, all of his books from Columbia Law School are in a library that we've preserved. And to recognize him, we created the Weston Research Center. And as part of that, every year we bring in 2 post-grad research fellows. So we have 2 up and coming privacy professionals that have just recently graduated. They come and work with us for a year. They report up through Omer Tene, our Chief Knowledge Officer, and Caitlin Fennessy, who is our Research Director. Caitlin significantly ran the Privacy Shield program at the Department of Commerce and then came to the IAPP. So they have amazing mentorship here. We give them a year of incredible work. They do research, they publish. In non-pandemic times, they go to our conferences, they moderate panels, they do all sorts of stuff. And then all of them have been rock stars. Omer and Caitlin and I, we kind of turn on our networking forces, and we do our very best to make sure that they land well. And every single one of the, I think we're up to 14 or 16 Weston Fellows now, has done exactly that. And our vision was that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, there will be this very exclusive group of people who are former Weston Research Fellows at the IAPP, who are the heads of privacy practices at law firms, who are chief privacy officers, who are, FTC commissioners and other things. And so Nicole is part of that emerging tradition for our profession. It's one of those things that I think helps to establish the architecture of a profession. And so she, whether she knew it or not, whether you knew it or not, Pedro, she's actually tapped into something really powerful, and she's doing great work. So I have every expectation she's going to be a rock star.
That's a great story and great stuff. And,
Isn't that the best? And thanks for mentioning Alan too, by the way, who I got to briefly meet many years ago by chance as well. God, man, I'm feeling pretty lucky right now.
Yeah.
I actually sat next to him at some pole dunk conference. I had no idea who he was, by the way. And he's just an older guy. And we just started chatting it up. And he sent me a signed copy of his book, which I have upstairs. And
oh, wow.
he is who he is. He's the actual godfather. So that was, I'm glad you mentioned him. And I'm glad this fellowship is named in his honor. That is well deserved.
Yep.
We're going to say thank
Yeah, well, hey,
we're going to say thanks for joining. Yeah, do you have a parting comment? For us?
No, just to reinforce the idea that Alan Weston really was a foundational figure for us, and to extend it one step further. Late last year, in celebration of our 20th anniversary, we announced the Weston Scholars Program. So Nicole is a Weston Research Fellow. We now have what we call the Weston Scholars Program. We know we're going to need tens of thousands of privacy professionals in the future. And so we are working with higher educational institutions around the world, law schools, computer science schools, business schools. And if they are teaching privacy or data protection, we have created an award, the Weston Scholar Award. They get $1,000, euros or pounds, whatever is appropriate. They get a copy of Privacy and Freedom from Alan Weston, and they get a nudge to join the privacy profession. Our expectation is we'll have between 100 and 150 of those schools receiving awards every year. So we're going to be sending out some significant cash to create future generations of privacy professionals. And we felt that was not only a great recognition of Alan, of Dr. Weston, but also a great way for us to celebrate our 20th anniversary.
Love it. Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for being with us. We hope to see you in person very soon. Don't know when that'll be, but we hope for that.
Sunglasses on. Sunglasses on, or it's not happening.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thanks, guys.
Sign off. Yep.
Thanks, man.
Hey, guys, that was great. Thanks.
Awesome.
That was really good. Thanks, Trevor. Really appreciate it, man.
Take care.
All right, you too.